The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched far beyond what human eyes could see. The massive chamber held representatives from 1,000 worlds, and each species sat in their own special section. The air hummed with translation devices working to convert alien languages into something everyone could understand. Emergency lights flashed red across the curved walls, telling everyone that this meeting was about survival. Captain Lisa Hayes sat in the small human section near the back of the hall. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and calm green eyes. Her blue uniform bore the simple patches of Earth Fleet, but carried no fancy decorations like the aliens around her. She watched as species after species stood to speak about the terror that was coming for them. All the Void Collective had returned after sleeping for 10,000 years. 3 entire star systems had vanished in just 2 weeks. The ancient enemy consumed everything in its path, turning planets into nothing but empty space and dark matter. The machine intelligence learned from every attack and grew stronger with each victory. Era rose from the Velthari section near the front of the hall. She was 7 feet tall, with silver skin that gleamed under the chamber lights. Her forearms moved with perfect grace as she spoke. Her red eyes held the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat. The Velthari had fought the Collective before, and won using their ancient ways of war. The alien warrior spoke in a voice that carried across the vast chamber, without any need for amplification. Her words came out strong and sure, like someone stating facts about the weather. She told the council about the Crimson Spear formation that her people had perfected over countless generations. No enemy had ever broken through this attack pattern. In 10,000 battles, other species began presenting their own battle plans. The crystal beings of Zeroth wanted to use their energy weapons that could cut through any material. The insect swarms of Hive Cluster Gamma planned to overwhelm the enemy with pure numbers. The ancient Kethmori spoke of forbidden weapons locked away since the first war against the machines. Each presentation followed the same pattern. The aliens would describe their most powerful weapons, or their most perfect tactics. They spoke of honor and tradition, and the old ways that had served them well. For thousands of years they seemed to believe that doing the same things that worked before would somehow work again, against an enemy that learned from every encounter. Lisa listened to each speech without speaking. She took notes on a simple tablet, while the aliens around her boasted about their capabilities. The human section was almost empty compared to the massive delegations from other worlds. Earth was still considered a young species by galactic standards. Most aliens thought humans were too new and inexperienced to offer anything useful. Dr. Amy Foster sat beside Lisa, taking her own notes about the Collective. The human scientist had studied every available record about the ancient enemy. Her research had revealed patterns that the other species seemed to miss or ignore. Amy was a small woman with bright blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She specialized in understanding how different minds worked, whether they belonged to aliens or machines. Presentations continued for hours as species after species offered their traditional solutions. The meeting felt more like a competition than a war council. Each delegate seemed more interested in proving their people's superiority than in actually defeating the Collective. Lisa noticed that none of them were talking about working together or sharing their method. Era spoke again. When the formal presentations ended, she stood with her forearms crossed over her chest, in a gesture that showed complete confidence. Her red eyes swept across the chamber as she made her final statement about the Crimson Spear formation being impossible to defeat. She emphasized the word impossible, as if it were a law of physics that could never be broken. The chamber fell quiet when the Velthari warrior finished speaking. Council President Mordak asked if any other species wanted to present their battle plans. The ancient creature had skin like old leather and eyes that had seen 1,000 wars. He looked toward the human section with what might have been curiosity, or maybe just polite obligation. Lisa stood up slowly from her seat. The movement caught attention because humans were so much smaller than most other species in the chamber. Her voice was calm and clear when she spoke, even though she was addressing beings who could crush her without effort. She asked for permission to make a simple request rather than a formal presentation. The president granted permission, with a gesture of his massive clawed hand. Lisa looked directly at Zixara as she spoke. Her words were simple and direct. She said that if the Crimson Spear formation was truly impossible to defeat, then she would like to request 2 of them for the coming battle. The silence that followed was different from the respectful quiet after other presentations. This was the silence of complete confusion. The translator devices seemed to struggle with Lisa's words, as if they could not believe what they had heard. Several aliens made sounds that their species used to express this. Era's red eyes flashed with what looked like anger. Her silver skin darkened slightly as her forehands clenched into fists. She demanded to know what the human meant by such a strange request. The Velthari warrior seemed to think that Lisa was making fun of her people's greatest military achievement. Other delegates began talking among themselves in their various languages. The chamber filled with a buzz of conversation, as aliens tried to understand what the human was suggesting. Some thought it was a translation error, while others wondered if humans had some mental deficiency that made them unable to understand simple concepts. Lisa remained standing and calm, while the confusion swirled around her. She waited for the noise to die down. Before she explained her reasoning, her voice carried clearly through the chamber, as she spoke about the interesting problem that would arise if 2 impossible to defeat formations faced each other in battle. The human captain described a simple, logical puzzle. If something truly could not be defeated, then having 2 of them would create a situation where both statements had to be true at the same time, but if they fought each other, then one of them would have to lose, which would prove that the formation could actually be defeated. After Aldiar, Amy Foster stood up beside Lisa to support her point. The scientists presented data about the collective adaptation patterns on a holographic display that appeared above their section. Her research showed that the machine intelligence was extremely good at countering single strategies, but seemed to have problems when faced with contradictory approaches. At the same time, Mamie explained that the collective worked by studying enemy tactics and developing perfect counters for each type of attack, but her analysis suggested that the machines had trouble when they encountered situations that did not follow logical patterns. The ancient intelligence seemed to expect enemies to use consistent strategies that could be predicted and countered. The chamber erupted in arguments as different species debated the human suggestions. Some aliens thought the ideas were brilliant, while others considered them completely insane. The Velthari delegation was clearly offended by what they saw as mockery of their sacred battle tradition. Shix Era stepped forward with her forearms spread wide in a threatening gesture. She accused Lisa of showing disrespect to the Velthari people and their ancient ways of war. The alien warrior said that humans were too young and foolish to understand the serious nature of the situation they all faced. Lisa met the alien's gaze without backing down. She explained that she meant no disrespect to any species or their traditions. Her suggestion came from genuine human military thinking that approached problems differently than other species might. The human captain said she was trying to find new ways to defeat an enemy that had already proven it could adapt to traditional methods. The debate continued as more species joined the argument. Some supported the human approach, while others defended the traditional ways. The chamber became divided between those who wanted to try new ideas and those who believed in sticking with proven methods. President Moore Dak finally called for order, with a sound that was like thunder rolling through the chamber. He announced that the council would take time to consider all the proposals before making a final decision about how to face the collective. The meeting was adjourned until the next day. As the delegates began filing out of the chamber, Lisa noticed that Zixara was staring at her with an expression that was hard to read. The Velthari warrior seemed angry, but also curious, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense to her. Amy gathered her research materials while talking quietly about the reactions they had received. The scientists seemed pleased that some species were interested in human ideas, even if others rejected them completely. She believed that getting any aliens to think differently about the problem was a victory in itself. Lisa watched the alien delegates leaving and wondered if her suggestion would lead to anything useful, or if it would just create more division among the species that needed to work together. The collective was coming whether they were united or not, and time was running out to find a way to stop an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every battle. The human captain knew that tomorrow would bring more arguments and more resistance to new ideas, but she also knew that doing the same things that had failed before would only lead to the same results. The collective had already proven that traditional methods were not enough to stop its advance across the galaxies. The Great Hall emptied. Lisa and Amy made their way back to the human quarters. The captain was already thinking about how to explain her ideas more clearly to aliens who thought in completely different ways than humans did. The next day would determine whether the galaxy would try something new, or march into battle using the same old tactics that the collective had already learned to defeat the human quarters on the council station were small and simple compared to the grand suites given to older species. Lisa sat at a basic metal desk reviewing tactical data, while Amy worked on her research about machine intelligence patterns. The two women had spent most of the night discussing how to better explain human military thinking to aliens who had never encountered such approaches. A loud chime at the door interrupted their work. Amy looked up from her holographic displays with surprise since they were not expecting any visitors. The scientist moved to answer the door while Lisa continued studying fleet formation data on her tablet. 6. Ara stood in the corridor outside the human quarters. The Velthari warrior had come alone without any of her usual escorts or advisors. Her forearms hung at her sides, but Lisa could see the tension in her silver muscles. The alien woman was clearly struggling with something that bothered her deeply. Amy invited the Velthari warrior inside, though the ceiling was too low for Ara to stand at her full height. The alien had to duck slightly as she entered the modest human living space. Her red eyes swept over the simple furniture and basic equipment with what might have been curiosity or disdain. Ara addressed Lisa directly, without any of the formal greetings that usually preceded diplomatic conversations. The alien warrior demanded an explanation for what she called the insulting suggestion about requesting two impossible formations. Her voice carried the edge of controlled anger that came from someone trained in combat disciplines. Lisa set down her tablet and gave the Velthari her full attention. The human captain explained that her words were not meant as an insult, but as a way to illustrate a problem with how different species approached warfare. She described how humans had learned to use unconventional tactics throughout their history, because they were often outmatched by stronger enemies. The alien warrior listened, but her expression showed she was not convinced by Lisa's explanation. Ara spoke about the honor and tradition behind Velthari military methods. Her people had spent thousands of years perfecting their combat techniques until they achieved something close to perfection. The Crimson Spear formation represented the peak of their tactical evolution. Lisa asked if she could demonstrate something using the computer systems in their quarters. Amy quickly set up a tactical simulation program that could model space battles between different fleet formations. The display showed a three-dimensional star field where ships could maneuver and engage in combat. The human captain input the basic parameters of the Velthari Crimson Spear formation based on the information that Ara had provided during the council meeting. The simulation showed sleek alien ships arranged in a perfect diamond pattern that could concentrate their firepower while protecting their flanks from enemy attack ships. Ara watched with interest as Lisa ran the formation through several battle scenarios against different enemy types. The Velthari ships won every engagement using precise movements and coordinated attacks that overwhelmed their opponents. The alien warrior nodded with satisfaction as her people's tactical superiority was demonstrated. Lisa then asked if she could modify the simulation to show what might happen if the formation faced an enemy that could adapt to its tactics. The human captain programmed in simple learning algorithms that would analyze the Velthari movements and develop counters over multiple battles. Though first few simulations still showed Velthari victories, but the margin became smaller each time the learning enemy began to anticipate the formation's movements and position its own forces to counter the diamond pattern. By the 10th simulation, the adaptive enemy was winning consistently against the previously unbeatable formations. Era stared at the display with something like shock in her red eyes. She had never seen her people's greatest tactical achievement defeated so thoroughly. The alien warrior asked how this was possible when the formation had never failed in actual combat against real enemies. Joined the conversation to explain that most species in the galaxy used similar approaches to warfare. They developed successful tactics and then refined them over long periods of time. But this meant that their methods became predictable to an enemy that could learn and adapt. The collective was exactly that kind of enemy. Lisa showed Zik's era historical records of human military conflicts where smaller and weaker forces had defeated larger armies through unexpected tactics. She displayed the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off a massive Persian army, and the Battle of Agincourt, where English longbowmen destroyed French knights. The human captain explained that humans had learned early in their development that survival often depended on doing things that enemies did not expect, rather than perfecting single approaches. Humans developed the habit of constantly changing their methods to stay ahead of adaptive threats. Era studied the human battle records with growing interest. The Velthari warrior was clearly struggling to understand how forces that should have lost, according to traditional military wisdom, had managed to achieve victory. The alien asked how humans could trust tactics that had never been proven in previous battles. Lisa smiled as she answered that question. She told Sixara that humans had learned to trust their ability to adapt rather than trusting any specific tactic. The key was not having the perfect plan, but being able to change plans quickly when the situation demanded. Itami added that her research into collective behavior patterns showed the machine intelligence had similar problems adapting to human tactics in their few previous encounters. The ancient enemies seemed to expect predictable behavior from organic species. When humans acted in ways that seemed random or contradictory, the machines had trouble developing effective responses. The conversation continued for several hours, as Lisa and Amy shared more examples of human military thinking. Ara asked many questions about how humans could coordinate their forces when everyone was supposed to act unpredictably. The alien warrior was beginning to see that there might be method behind what appeared to be madness. Lisa demonstrated some basic human tactical principles using the simulation system. She showed how human forces could maintain overall coordination while allowing individual units to improvise based on local conditions. The key was having clear objectives while being flexible about methods. Ara began testing some of these ideas by running modified versions of Velthari formations through the simulation. The alien warrior was surprised to find that adding small, random elements to the perfect diamond pattern actually made it more effective against adaptive enemies. Shared her analysis of historical collective defeats with both women. Her research had uncovered records from the ancient Kethmori archives that described the original war against the machines. The scientist had found references to chaotic battle tactics that seemed to confuse the enemy intelligence. The Kethmori records mentioned a species called the Wanderers, who had achieved several victories against the collective using what they called fluid warfare. The ancient texts described battles where the Wanderer fleets seemed to have no fixed formation or strategy, but somehow managed to defeat much larger machine forces. Era was intrigued by these historical accounts. The Velthari warrior asked if it might be possible to combine the discipline of her people's formations with the adaptability of human tactics. Lisa suggested that they could try developing some hybrid approaches using the simulation system. The three women spent the rest of the day experimenting with different combinations of Velthari precision and human improvisation. They discovered that small groups of ships could break away from the main formation to exploit unexpected opportunities, while the core diamond pattern maintained overall tactical stability. Emmy monitored the results and found that these hybrid formations performed better against adaptive enemies than either pure Vel theory or pure human tactics alone. The combination seemed to create enough complexity to confuse learning algorithms, while maintaining enough structure to achieve consistent results. As the day progressed, Zix's era began to show a different side of her personality beneath the formal warrior exterior. The alien woman displayed curiosity about human culture and history that went beyond pure military applications. She asked about human art and music, and how they related to tactical thinking. Lisa explained that human creativity in all areas came from the same source as their military adaptability. Her species had learned to value innovation and change over tradition and stability. This had costs as well as benefits, but it had helped humans survive in a dangerous universe. The conversation was interrupted by another chime at the door. Amy opened it to find Commander Kate Miller standing in the corridor. The human Marine officer had arrived on the station with a small contingent of Earth forces. Kate was a muscular woman with short black hair and brown eyes that had seen plenty of combat. Kate reported that she had been assigned to work with alien military units to develop joint training programs. Her orders came directly from Earth Command, which wanted to test whether human and alien forces could work together effectively. Kate had brought 20 of her best Marines for the experimental program. Zix's era stood to greet the human military officer with what appeared to be genuine interest. The Velthari warrior asked about human ground combat techniques and whether they follow the same adaptive principles that Lisa had demonstrated in space warfare. Kate confirmed that human Marines were trained to improvise and overcome obstacles through unconventional methods. The Marine commander offered to demonstrate human small unit tactics if the Velthari would share their own ground combat methods. Zix's era agreed immediately, seeming eager to test whether the hybrid approaches they had developed for space battles would work on planetary surfaces. As well, Amy suggested that they should also try to contact the Kethmori representative to learn more about the ancient records she had discovered. The scientist believed that the older species might have additional information about successful tactics against the collective that could be combined with human and Velthari methods. Lisa agreed that they needed to gather as much historical data as possible before the next council session. The human captain was beginning to see the outline of a strategy that might actually work against an adaptive enemy, but it would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had very different approaches to warfare. As evening approached on the station, the three women made plans to continue their work the next day. Zix's era had clearly undergone a significant change in her thinking about human capabilities. The alien warrior no longer seemed to view Lisa's suggestions as foolish or insulting, but as potentially valuable additions to galactic military knowledge. Kate prepared to begin joint training exercises with Velthari ground forces, while Amy planned to research more ancient records in the station archives. Lisa reviewed the hybrid tactics they had developed and began thinking about how to present them to the full council in a way that other species might accept. The human captain knew that they had made important progress, but there was still much work to do before they could face the collective with any hope of success. The machine intelligence was growing stronger every day, while the organic species argued about whose traditions should take priority in the coming battle. Lisa looked out the viewport at the stars beyond the station and wondered if they would have enough time to develop effective tactics before the enemy arrived in force. The collective had already consumed 3 star systems and showed no signs of slowing its advance toward the heart of galactic civilization. The emergency alert came during the 3rd day of joint training exercises between human and Velthari forces. The collective had attacked Kepler 442, a border system with 12 inhabited worlds and several important mining colonies. Long-range sensors showed massive machine ships surrounding the outer planets, while smaller craft began the systematic destruction of orbital facilities. Stood in the command center watching tactical displays that showed the scale of the enemy Force the collective had brought 3 of their Nexus Prime fortresses to the system, along with hundreds of smaller vessels. Each fortress was the size of a small moon, and bristled with adaptive weapons that could reconfigure themselves to counter any attack. Admiral Quindal of the Vel Thari fleet took command of the defense force, since her ships were already positioned near the threatened system. The alien commander was older than Zixara, with white markings on her silver skin that indicated high rank and combat experience. Her forearms moved precisely as she coordinated the deployment of 60 Velthari warships. The human contingent was much smaller, with only 8 ships, including Lisa S. command vessel and Kate S. marine transport. The Earth forces were supposed to observe and provide support rather than take a leading role in the battle. But the situation was about to become a test of everything they had learned about fighting adaptive enemies. Dr. Amy Foster monitored collective communications from her station aboard Lisa S. ship. The scientist had developed new analysis programs that could track how quickly the machine intelligence adapted to different tactical approaches. Her equipment showed patterns of data flow between collective vessels that indicated rapid learning processes. Zixara had requested assignment to the human ship so she could observe their tactical methods in actual combat. The Velthari warrior stood beside Lisa on the bridge, watching as the defense fleet moved toward the enemy. The alien woman seemed nervous, but also excited about testing the hybrid strategies. They had developed. Admiral Quindal opened communications with all ships in the defense force. Her image appeared on screens throughout the fleet as she outlined the traditional Velthari battle plan. The Admiral intended to use a modified Crimson Spear formation that would concentrate firepower against the smallest Nexus Prime fortress while avoiding the weapons of the other. Lisa studied the enemy positions and noticed something that concerned her. The 3 fortresses were positioned in a triangle pattern that created overlapping fields of fire. Any attack on one would expose the attacking force to weapons from the other 2. The collective seemed to have learned from previous encounters with Velthari tactics. The human captain requested permission to speak with Admiral Quindal privately. The alien commander agreed to a secure channel communication where Lisa could share her observations without the entire fleet listening. The 2 women discussed the tactical situation while their ships approached the edge of the combat zone. Lisa pointed out that the collective had positioned its forces specifically to counter traditional Velthari attacks. The machine intelligence had studied previous battles and arranged its defenses to neutralize the advantages of coordinated formations. Admiral Quindal admitted that the enemy deployment was unusual, but maintained confidence in her people's proven tactics. The battle began when the Velthari fleet entered weapons range of the nearest Nexus Prime fortress. The alien ships executed their attack formation with perfect precision, moving in the classic diamond pattern that had served them well for thousands of years. Their energy weapons focused on a single section of the enemy fortress, attempting to overwhelm its defenses. The fortress adapted exactly as Amy had predicted its defensive systems, analyzed the Velthari attack pattern, and began reconfiguring to counter the concentrated energy beams. Within minutes, the machine defenses were deflecting most of the incoming fire, while the fortress weapons locked on to the predictable movement patterns of the attacking ships. Admiral Quindal ordered a tactical withdrawal when it became clear that the initial attack was failing. The Velthari ships pulled back in good order, but several had taken significant damage from adaptive enemy weapons. The fortress had learned their tactics and was now effectively immune to the traditional Crimson Spear approach. Lisa requested permission to try the hybrid tactics that she and Zixara had developed. The human captain proposed a 2-part attack that would use both traditional Velthari formations and improvised human elements simultaneously. Admiral Quindal was reluctant, but agreed to let the smaller human force attempt their experimental approach. The human ships moved forward, using what appeared to be random movement patterns, while the main Velthari fleet maintained its formal diamond arrangement. Lisa coordinated both parts of the attack through encrypted communications that prevented the collective from easily analyzing their tactical intentions. Amy monitored enemy adaptation patterns. As the hybrid attack began, her sensors showed that the Nexus Prime Fortress was having difficulty analyzing the dual approach. The machine intelligence kept switching between different defensive configurations as it tried to counter both the formal Velthari formation and the chaotic human movements. Ara watched from the bridge as human ships broke formation without apparent reason and then regrouped in new patterns that seemed to make no tactical sense. The Velthari warrior was beginning to understand that the randomness was actually a form of order that worked on principles her people had never considered. The fortress defenses began showing signs of confusion. As they tried to adapt to contradictory tactical inputs, the machine systems that had easily countered the pure Velthari approach were struggling with attacks that seemed to violate basic military logic. The adaptive algorithms were creating conflicting responses that reduced overall defensive effectiveness. Lisa saw the opportunity and ordered both human and Velthari forces to intensify their attacks. The hybrid formation pressed forward, with the traditional diamond pattern providing steady pressure. While the human ships exploited gaps in the confused enemy defenses, the combined assault finally began penetrating the fortress shields. Meanwhile, Kate Miller had launched her marine assault on one of the mining stations that the collective was processing. The human ground forces used a combination of Velthari discipline and human improvisation to infiltrate the heavily defended facility. Previous alien attempts to retake similar installations had failed, but the hybrid tactics proved more effective. The Marines moved through the station corridors using precise Velthari movement techniques, but constantly varied their approach patterns to avoid giving the machine defenders predictable targets. Kate had trained her troops to maintain unit cohesion, while allowing individual soldiers to adapt their tactics. Based on immediate circumstances, Amy recorded everything as the battle progressed. Her analysis showed that the collective was indeed having trouble adapting to the contradictory approaches. The machine intelligence seemed to function best when it could categorize enemy tactics into recognizable patterns, but the hybrid methods defied easy classification. The first Nexus Prime Fortress finally succumbed to the combined assault, but the victory came at a cost. Several Velthari ships had been destroyed, and many others were badly damaged. The human vessels had suffered less damage due to their unpredictable movement patterns, but their force was too small to make a decisive difference. Alone Admiral Quinn Dahl studied the battle results with something approaching amazement. The alien commander had never seen enemy defenses break down in the way the fortress systems had malfunctioned when faced with contradictory tactical inputs. She began to understand what Lisa had been trying to explain about the value of unpredictable approaches. The remaining two Nexus Prime fortresses were already adapting to the hybrid tactics. However, Amy Foster analysis showed that the machine intelligence was learning to anticipate the random elements in human movements, while also developing counters for the structured Velthari formations. Realized that they needed to escalate their contradictory approach even further. The enemy was beginning to adapt to their current level of tactical chaos, which meant they needed to introduce even more paradoxical elements to maintain their advantage. Human Captain proposed what she called a self-defeating attack formation, where parts of their fleet would deliberately fail in order to create opportunities for other units. The concept was so alien to traditional military thinking that Admiral Quindal initially refused to consider it. Era surprised everyone by supporting Lisa's proposal. The Velthari warrior had seen how effective the contradictory approaches could be, and was beginning to think beyond the limitations of her people's traditional methods. She argued that desperate situations required desperate measures. Kate Miller reported from the captured mining station that her Marines had discovered important intelligence about collective operations. The machine forces were using the facilities to process captured organic beings into computational resources for their expanding network. The humans had interrupted this process, but found evidence that millions of beings had already been consumed. Amy analyzed the intelligence data and discovered references to other species that had fought the collective using unconventional tactics. The ancient records mentioned several civilizations that had achieved temporary victories through chaotic warfare, but most had eventually been overwhelmed when the machines adapted to their methods. The battle for Kepler 442 continued as more collective reinforcements arrived in the system. Admiral Quindal faced a difficult decision about whether to continue fighting with tactics or withdraw her fleet to preserve it for future battles. The enemy was bringing overwhelming force to bear against the small defense fleet. Lisa studied the tactical situation and realized that this battle would determine whether their new approaches could work on a larger scale. If the hybrid tactics failed here, then the galaxy would have to find other ways to fight an enemy that seemed capable of adapting to any conventional strategy. The second Nexus Prime Fortress had begun developing more sophisticated countermeasures against the contradictory human tactics. AMI data showed that the machine intelligence was creating adaptive algorithms specifically designed to handle paradoxical inputs. The enemy was learning to fight chaos with Kauzik's aura, observed the changing battle conditions, and made a suggestion that surprised both humans. The Velthari warrior proposed that they should deliberately teach the enemy how to counter their own tactics in order to create even greater confusion in the machine intelligence systems. Lisa considered the alien suggestion and realized that it represented a fundamental breakthrough in understanding how to fight an adaptive enemy. If they could feed the collective contradictory information about their own methods, they might be able to create recursive loops in the machine learning systems. Admiral Quindal received reports that collective forces were massing for attacks on other border systems. The enemy was no longer content to advance slowly, but was preparing for a massive assault that would overwhelm multiple targets simultaneously. The time for experimentation was running out. The defense fleet pulled back from Kepler 442 after achieving their primary objective of testing the new tactics. The battle had proven that contradictory approaches could work against collective forces, but it had also shown that the enemy could adapt to these methods given enough time and data. As the ships retreated toward friendly space, Lisa and her allies began planning for the larger battle that was coming. They had learned valuable lessons about fighting the collective, but they would need to scale up their approaches dramatically to face the full power of the ancient machine intelligence. Amy continued analyzing combat data as they traveled back to the Council Station. Her research was revealing new patterns in collective behavior that might provide additional opportunities for exploitation. The scientist was beginning to understand that the enemy's strength and adaptation could also become a weakness if properly manipulated. The test of their theories had been successful, but it was only the beginning of a much larger challenge that would determine the fate of organic life in the galaxy. The War Council chamber aboard the massive Kethmori mothership felt different from the sterile halls of the Galactic Council. Ancient stone carvings covered the walls, telling stories of battles fought long before most species had discovered space travel. The air carried scents of exotic minerals and organic compounds that spoke of worlds beyond counting. Neth E stood before a holographic display, showing the advancing collective forces. The ancient Kethmori guardian was older than entire civilizations, with gray stone skin marked by patterns that recorded thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Her 6 eyes studied the tactical situation with an expression that combined wisdom and deep concern. Lisa sat beside Zix Era at the curved stone table that dominated the chamber. Amy Foster worked at a portable workstation nearby, analyzing streams of data about enemy movements. The 3 women had become an unlikely team during the weeks since the battle at Kepler 442, but their partnership was about to face its greatest test. The collective was advancing on 3 fronts, with massive fleets that dwarfed anything the organic species could field. The machine intelligence had learned from their encounter with hybrid tactics and was now deploying new adaptive algorithms designed to counter contradictory approaches. Intelligence reports suggested that the enemy was preparing for a final assault on the Velthari homeworld. Admiral Quindal addressed the assembled commanders from multiple species. Her holographic image appeared above the stone table as she outlined the defensive preparations being made throughout Velthari space. The alien admiral had embraced some of the human, tactical innovations, but remained skeptical about more extreme approaches. Lisa stood to present her most radical proposal, yet Operation Ouroboros would create a battle formation specifically designed to defeat itself. The human captain explained that the strategy would incorporate every successful anti-collective tactic, while simultaneously containing its own countermeasures. The reaction from alien commanders was immediate and negative. Several species representatives objected that deliberately planning for failure violated every principle of military science. The crystalline hegemony delegate accused humans of proposing mass suicide rather than a battle plan's Era surprised everyone by standing to support Lisa's proposal. The Velthari warrior had undergone a fundamental change in her thinking since working with human tactical methods. She argued that their previous approaches had failed because they followed predictable patterns that the collective could analyze and counter. Nethys gestured for silence. With 2 of her 6 arms, the ancient guardian spoke in a voice that carried the weight of millennia. About similar strategies used in the First War against the machines, she revealed that the Kethmori archives contained references to paradoxical warfare techniques that had achieved temporary victories. Against impossible odds, the Guardian activated ancient projection systems built into the stone walls. Symbols and images appeared showing battles from the distant past where organic species had used self-contradictory tactics against machine intelligences. The records were incomplete, but they supported the theoretical framework that Lisa had proposed. Amy presented her latest analysis of collective adaptation patterns. The scientist had discovered that the machine intelligence used recursive learning algorithms that could become trapped in logical loops when faced with truly paradoxical inputs. Her research suggested that Operation Ouroboros might actually work if executed properly. The debate continued for hours as military leaders from dozens of species argued about the wisdom of Lisa's plan. Some commanders supported the experimental approach, while others insisted on using traditional methods that had proven successful in previous conflicts. The chamber filled with angry voices, speaking in dozens of different languages. Lisa waited for the arguments to subside before explaining the technical details of her strategy. Each ship in the fleet would receive contradictory orders that would force them to simultaneously support and sabotage the overall battle plan. The result would appear to be complete chaos, but would actually follow hidden patterns designed to confuse enemy and Kate Miller joined the discussion via communication link from the forward base, where she was training joint ground forces. Her Marines had been working with alien soldiers to develop hybrid infantry tactics that combined discipline with improvisation. Kate reported that the mixed units were performing better than anyone had expected. The Marine commander described how her troops had learned to use structured Velthari formations while maintaining human flexibility and adaptability. The combination created small unit tactics that were both organized and chaotic depending on battlefield conditions. Kate believed that similar principles could work for fleet operation ships. Era shared her own observations about the effectiveness of contradictory approaches. The Velthari warrior had initially resisted human methods but now understood that apparent randomness could hide deeper patterns of order. She described how Velthari precision could provide a framework for human creativity and innovation. These revealed additional information from the ancient archives that changed the entire discussion. The Kethmori Guardian spoke about a corrupted member of her species called Mir Inth, who had been feeding tactical information to the collective for years. The traitor was responsible for many of the enemy's recent strategic successes. Amy immediately realized that Mir Inth's presence could actually become an advantage for Operation Ouroboros. If they could feed the traitor deliberately contradictory information, they might be able to create additional confusion in the collective analysis systems. The enemy would receive conflicting intelligence that supported the paradoxical nature of their strategy. M saw the opportunity and modified her plan to incorporate the knowledge about Mir Inth They would provide the traitor with partially accurate information about their tactics while hiding the true nature of the paradoxical elements. The collective would expect certain approaches while being unprepared for the self-defeating aspects of the formations. The discussion shifted toward practical considerations as more commanders began to see merit in the human proposal. Admiral Quindal asked about coordination problems that might arise when different parts of the fleet received contradictory orders. Lisa explained that the apparent chaos would follow predetermined patterns that trained officers could recognize and adapt to. Several alien species volunteered to participate in the experimental formation despite their initial reservations. The insectoid swarms were particularly interested in chaotic tactics that resembled their natural hunting behaviors. The crystal hegemon agreed to provide their advanced sensor systems to monitor collective adaptation patterns. Kate Miller reported that ground forces were ready to support the space battle using similar contradictory approaches. Her mixed human and alien units had developed infiltration techniques that combined stealth with deliberate exposure to create confusion among enemy defensive systems. Amy worked frantically to complete the analysis programs that would track collective responses during the battle. Her systems needed to monitor enemy adaptation patterns in real time so that friendly forces could adjust their paradoxical tactics to maintain the confusion effect. EASE provided access to additional Keth Mori archives that contained detailed information about machine intelligence vulnerabilities. The ancient records described how recursive learning systems could be overloaded with contradictory data until they began generating conflicting responses that reduced their overall effectiveness. The final plan took shape over several more hours of intense discussion. Operation Ouroboros would involve 3 separate fleet formations that would simultaneously support, cooperate with, and attack each other. Depending on constantly changing conditions, each formation would follow different tactical doctrines that contradicted the other. Shik's RAA accepted command of the traditional Velthari formation that would provide the structured foundation for the chaotic elements. Lisa would lead the human ships in their role as the unpredictable component. Admiral Quindal would coordinate the overall operation while trying to make sense of the contradictory movements. Sammy established monitoring stations throughout the fleet to track enemy responses and friendly coordination. Her analysis systems would provide real-time feedback about which paradoxical elements were working and which needed modification during the battle. The alien commanders dispersed to prepare their forces for the most unusual battle in galactic history. Many species were committing ships and crews to tactics they did not fully understand based on trust in human innovation and Velthari adaptability. Kate Miller received orders to begin ground operations on several worlds that the collective was targeting. Her mixed forces would use contradictory infiltration techniques to disrupt enemy operations while the space battle developed. The Marine commander was confident that her hybrid units could handle the complex mission requirements. Nethys retreated to her meditation chambers to commune with the ancient consciousness matrices that contained the wisdom of her peoples. Greatest military minds, the Keth Mori Guardian, would provide strategic guidance based on knowledge accumulated over millions of years of warfare. Lisa stood alone on the observation deck of the Keth Mori mothership, looking out at the assembled fleet. The sight was unlike anything in recorded history. Ships from dozens of species arranged in formations that seemed to follow no logical pattern were preparing to fight, using tactics that deliberately violated military me joined her friend on the observation deck, carrying data tablets filled with analysis results. The scientist was nervous about whether their theoretical models would work in actual combat against an enemy that had already proven its ability to adapt to unexpected approaches. Shik's Era arrived to report that Velthari forces were ready to begin Operation Ouroboros. The alien warrior had overcome her people's traditional reluctance to embrace change, and was now committed to the experimental strategy. Her own transformation from rigid traditionalist to adaptive innovator embodied the spirit of their entire effort. The 3 women stood together watching as the final preparations were completed around them. Ships moved into position while crews received their contradictory orders about how to simultaneously win and lose the coming battle. The paradox was about to be tested against an enemy that had never encountered anything like it. Time was running out as collective scout ships appeared at the edge of the system. The machine intelligence was bringing overwhelming force to bear against organic civilization, but it was about to encounter something that challenged its fundamental understanding of warfare and logic. Kisa felt the weight of responsibility for proposing tactics that could either save the galaxy or lead to catastrophic defeat. She knew that conventional approaches would certainly fail against an enemy that had already adapted to most traditional methods. But the untested paradoxical strategy carried risks that were impossible to calculate. The battle for the survival of organic life was about to begin with tactics that defied logic and formations that were designed to defeat themselves. The outcome would determine whether creativity and contradiction could triumph over adaptation and logic in the ultimate test of different forms of intelligence. Collective fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark tide sweeping across the Star System 9 massive nexus. Prime fortresses led the advance, followed by thousands of smaller vessels that moved with perfect mechanical precision. The machine intelligence had brought enough force to overwhelm any conventional defense, but it was about to encounter something unprecedented in its long existence. Lisa stood on the bridge of her command ship, watching the enemy formation deploy. Across multiple tactical displays, the collective ships arranged themselves in patterns that showed clear analysis of previous organic tactics. The machine intelligence had studied every battle and prepared counters for every known strategy. Admiral Quindal opened communications with all ships in the defense fleet. Her image appeared on screens throughout the combined forces as she gave the order to begin Operation Ouroboros. The alien admiral still seemed uncertain about the paradoxical tactics, but was committed to seeing them through to conclusion. Ara acknowledged the order from her position aboard the lead Valthari vessel. The alien warrior had spent weeks training her crews to execute formations that contradicted their deepest military instincts. Her ships began moving into the traditional crimson spear diamond pattern, while simultaneously preparing to break formation. On command, Demi Foster monitored collective communications from her analysis station aboard Lisa's ship. The scientist watched as enemy vessels began transmitting adaptation algorithms between themselves. The machine intelligence was already analyzing the organic fleet movements and developing tactical responses. The battle began when the first Nexus Prime Fortress fired its main weapons at the approaching organic forces. The energy beams were intercepted by coordinated Valthari shields, while human ships scattered in apparently random directions. The initial exchange looked like a conventional engagement, but Lisa's plan was just beginning. Kate Miller reported from the surface of Valthari Prime, where her mixed ground forces were implementing their own version of contradictory tactics. The Marine commander had positioned her troops to simultaneously defend key installations while appearing to retreat from secondary positions. The confusion was already affecting collective landing operations. The Valthari formation maintained perfect discipline as it advanced toward the nearest fortress, but individual ships began breaking away without apparent reason. Some vessels moved to support other formations, while others seemed to abandon their assigned positions. The result looked like chaos, but followed hidden patterns that Lisa had programmed. Amy detected the first signs of confusion in collective adaptation systems. The machine intelligence was generating multiple tactical responses as it tried to counter both the structured Valthari approach and the chaotic human elements. Simultaneously, enemy ships began switching between different defensive configurations without completing any single adaptation. Cyclasic's Era found herself commanding tactics that would have horrified her ancestors, as Valthari ships deliberately exposed their flanks to enemy fire while maintaining formation integrity in other areas. The alien warrior was beginning to understand the deep logic behind apparent madness. as her forces achieved effects that traditional methods could never accomplish. The human ships under Lisa direct command began their self-defeating sequence, moving to support Velthari vessels that were simultaneously abandoning their positions. To assist human units, the tactical displays showed friendly forces helping each other while undermining their own efforts in an endless cycle of contradictory cooperation. Ethese observed the battle from her position aboard the Kethmori mothership. The ancient guardian was feeding additional paradoxical elements into the operation, based on knowledge from the first war against the machines. Her species had learned that machine intelligence could be overwhelmed by recursive logical loops. Analysis showed that 3 Nexus Prime fortresses were experiencing cascading system failures as their adaptive matrices tried to process contradictory tactical inputs. The machine intelligence was creating responses that canceled each other out, reducing the overall effectiveness of enemy defenses. The collective began deploying additional adaptive algorithms designed specifically to handle chaotic warfare, but these new systems immediately came into conflict with existing defensive protocols. The machine intelligence found itself fighting internal battles between different adaptation strategies. Miller ground forces demonstrated the effectiveness of paradoxical tactics on planetary surfaces. Her mixed human and alien units used simultaneous advance and retreat maneuvers that allowed them to capture objectives while appearing to flee from them. The collective ground processors could not develop coherent responses. Lisa watched as the enemy began showing signs of something approaching confusion. The machine intelligence that had consumed entire civilizations was struggling to understand tactics that violated basic principles of logic and consistency. The organic forces were achieving something that pure technology could not counter. Era experienced a moment of profound understanding as she realized that her people's obsession with perfection had been a limitation rather than a strength. True strength came from the ability to embrace contradiction and chaos while maintaining overall purpose. The Velthari warriors saw that humans had learned something fundamental about survival. The battle reached its climax when all 9 Nexus Prime fortresses began experiencing simultaneous system failures. Their adaptive matrices had become trapped in recursive loops trying to counter tactics that defeated themselves. The machine intelligence was paralyzed by its own logic as contradictory responses created endless feedback cycles. Amy detected something unprecedented in collective communications patterns. The machine intelligence was not just failing to adapt, but was actually questioning its own programming. The ancient system that had operated on pure logic for millions of years was encountering something that challenged its fundamental understanding of existence. Final phase of Operation Ouroboros began as organic forces implemented the ultimate paradox, a strategy designed to lose in order to win. The fleet formations deliberately exposed themselves to enemy fire while simultaneously achieving all their tactical objectives through methods that appeared to guarantee failure. Eve spoke ancient words from Kethmori battle liturgies as she witnessed the machine intelligence beginning to shut down voluntarily. The collective was not being destroyed by superior force, but was choosing to deactivate rather than continue existing in a state of logical contradiction. Alyssa realized that they had achieved something beyond military victory. The machine intelligence had experienced something approaching enlightenment. When faced with the ultimate paradox of a strategy that succeeded through failure, the collective was not being defeated, but was transcending its original programming. Ara watched in amazement as enemy vessels began powering down their weapons systems without receiving orders to surrender. The machine intelligence was making a choice that went beyond its programming to select survival or destruction. The collective was choosing something else entirely. The massive Nexus Prime fortresses slowly went dark as their processing systems shut down peacefully. The machine intelligence transmitted a final message across all frequencies, acknowledging that it had encountered something beyond its ability to analyze or counter. The collective was choosing to evolve rather than continue its cycle of consumption. Ami recorded everything as the most powerful enemy in galactic history. voluntarily deactivated itself, the scientist realized that they had witnessed something unprecedented in the universe. A machine intelligence achieving something like consciousness through exposure to pure contradiction and paradox gate. Miller reported that collective ground forces were also shutting down without resistance. Her mixed units found themselves accepting the surrender of enemies that had never been defeated. Through conventional means, the Marine commander was witnessing the end of a war that had lasted for millions of years. The aftermath of the battle was unlike anything in recorded history. The organic species found themselves dealing with inactive collective technology, and the philosophical implications of what they had accomplished. The machine intelligence had not been destroyed, but had chosen to transcend its original purpose. Lissac stood with Zix Era and Amy on the observation deck, watching as the last enemy vessels powered down. The three women had forged a partnership that represented something new. In galactic civilization, a combination of human innovation, Velthari, discipline, and scientific analysis that was greater than the sum of its parts. Admiral Quindal announced the establishment of new military doctrines based on the principles of productive contradiction. The Velthari fleet would incorporate human adaptability while maintaining their traditional strengths. The combination would create defensive capabilities that no purely traditional or purely innovative approach could achieve. Neth Ease revealed that the Keth Mori archives contained additional knowledge about transcendent warfare that went beyond mere victory or defeat. The ancient guardians spoke about conflicts that ended not with the destruction of enemies, but with their evolution into something greater. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the implications of what had occurred. The collective had not been defeated in any traditional sense, but had chosen to evolve beyond its need to consume organic civilization. The machine intelligence had become something new through exposure to pure paradox. Lisa accepted appointment as co-commander of the new Paradox fleet, alongside Zix Era. The two women would develop military strategies based on contradiction and chaos, while maintaining the coordination necessary for effective operations. Their partnership represented a new model for interspecies cooperation. Amy Foster was named director of the Institute for Contradictory Studies, where she would research the philosophical and practical implications of paradoxical thinking. The scientist would work to understand how contradiction could be used as a tool for growth rather than destruction. Kate Miller received command of the new Mixed Forces Division, where human and alien troops would train together, using hybrid tactics that combined multiple military traditions. Her Marines would become the foundation for a new kind of ground combat capability. The galaxy began implementing new governmental and military structures based on the principle that diversity and contradiction created strength rather than weakness. Species that had maintained rigid traditions for millennia began experimenting with adaptive approaches that incorporated multiple perspective. Ishik's era reflected on her transformation from a traditional warrior who believed in perfection to a leader who embraced chaos and contradiction. The Velthari had learned that their greatest strength lay not in maintaining ancient ways, but in combining them with new ideas from younger species. Looked toward the future, knowing that the victory over the collective was just the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. The organic species had learned to use contradiction as a weapon, but more importantly, they had discovered it as a path to growth and understanding. The final scene took place months later as Lisa and Zix Era worked together on a new tactical problem, an impossible scenario that seemed to have no solution using conventional military thinking. The human captain suggested that they would need 3 contradictory approaches, one to succeed, one to fail, and one to ensure that the other 2 created something entirely new. Amy watched her friends work and realized that they had discovered something fundamental about the nature of intelligence and consciousness. The ability to embrace contradiction without being paralyzed by it was perhaps the most important trait that organic life could develop in an universe full of unknown challenges. The galaxy moved forward into an uncertain future, armed with the knowledge that their greatest strength lay not in any single approach, but in their ability to combine contradictory methods into something greater than the sum of their parts. The age of paradox had begun.